Post 7, radio check, over.
Post 7, be advised, movement at the wire, west sector, over. Copy, Post 7, description of movement, over.
Base, it's not a burrow. Repeat, negative on burrow. It's upright.
Post 7, say again your last, over.
That radio traffic, reconstructed from a written account submitted by a soldier who served at the National Training Center, is one of several strange reports that have surfaced from Fort Irwin over the years. A base most people outside the Army have probably never heard of, despite it being one of the largest and strangest patches of ground the U.S. military operates on. Fort Irwin sits out in the Mojave Desert, California, roughly the size of Rhode Island. Over 1,000 square miles of open desert used almost exclusively to run brigade-sized combat training rotations. Units cycle through here for weeks at a time to fight against a dedicated opposing force in scenarios designed to feel as close to real combat as training can get, complete with mock villages, role players, and simulated casualties. It is, by design, meant to feel like a different country, entirely isolated, vast, and largely empty except for whoever the Army has decided to put out there that week. Except, according to a small handful of soldiers, not always as empty as advertised. This account was submitted by a soldier who pulled perimeter duty during a rotation at Fort Irwin, guarding a static position along the outer training area boundary. This is what he says.
Most nights out there are dead boring. You watch The Wire, you watch nothing happen, you drink bad coffee and wait for stand down. This one night, my battle buddy and I both caught movement out past the fence, maybe 40 yards out. First thought was burrow, because the wild ones wander through the training areas all the time and everybody's used to seeing them. But this thing was on 2 legs, moving low and fast, and it crossed through a gap in the wire that honestly shouldn't have been big enough for a person to fit through, let alone whatever this was. I called it in exactly like it happened. Dispatch asked me to confirm burrow. I told them negative, upright, and that's when the radio just went dead air on their end for a few seconds. When they came back, they just told us to hold position and report if we saw it again. We never got a follow-up on what it actually was, and when I asked my squad leader the next morning, he just told me to drop it.
A separate account, submitted independently through a military ghost story archive, describes an encounter at one of Fort Irwin's mock villages, the ones built for force-on-force training exercises designed to simulate combat in populated areas. He writes, "We were doing a night iteration in one of the training villages, playing the counterinsurgency scenario, clearing buildings with simunition. About halfway through, half my squad swears they saw a role player standing on a rooftop who wasn't supposed to be there. No gear, no vest, just standing still watching us clear the street below. When we called it up over the radio to ask if we had an unaccounted for civilian role player on the objective, Control told us there was nobody assigned to that rooftop. By the time anyone looked back up, it was gone. Nobody could explain who or what it was, and the exercise just continued like normal, which honestly felt worse than if someone had stopped it. Long before Fort Irwin existed as a training area, this stretch of the Mojave was home to the Serrano, Mojave, and Chemehuevi peoples, whose oral histories describe the desert itself as far from empty, populated by figures that moved at the edges of camps and settlements, seen briefly and rarely explained. Modern soldiers rotating through on a 2-week training cycle obviously aren't steeped in this history, and most have likely never heard a word of it. Which makes it a little stranger that so many of the descriptions coming out of the specific stretch of desert, upright, fast, glimpsed only at the edge of vision before vanishing, line up so closely with descriptions that predate the base by centuries. The final account is the shortest, taken from a single comment left on a veteran discussion thread by someone who says he served as an opera role player at Fort Irwin. We had a standing joke in our unit about not going past the wash line after dark during rotations. Nobody wanted to say out loud why. I will say this much. Whatever the joke was based on, I only heard it repeated by guys who had actually seen something out there, never by anyone who hadn't. No further explanation was given. There's no official record of anything unusual at Fort Irwin, and there wouldn't be, given the nature of the base and the training that happens there. Strange shapes of the edge of a rotational training exercise are easy enough to write off as fatigue, bad lighting, or a role player wandering off script. But it's worth remembering that this desert was never actually empty to begin with, no matter how the Army's maps are drawn, and whoever or whatever crossed that wire at 0248 hours clearly wasn't waiting around to be identified. The log entry for that shift ends there. No further entries were recorded until 0600,